All right. You'll
All right,
begin, Margaret.
Nathan, take it away.
Well, we'll let Margaret introduce, huh?
Oh, Margaret, you go first.
Hello, my name is Margaret Moore. I'm a freshman at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I'm hosting the Zoom into the State Department night with the Underrepresented Students Society Politics and Government Division. Thank you for coming out here tonight, and thank you especially to our guests, J. Nathan Bland, the Diplomat in Residence for the Central South region, and Ms. Kris Sivertson, the Diplomat in Residence for the Texas region. Thank you both for coming out tonight. We're really looking forward to this event.
Thank you for inviting us. As I was mentioning just now, this is our first time doing this together. We usually have our own regions, and we do things pretty much solo, but it's actually nice to team up with one of my fellow diplomats and residents to bring you information about the State Department and our career opportunities and our student program opportunities as well. What I plan on doing this evening is I'll be going through a slideshow, basically, just so I can give you a very structured and clear format about the State Department, what we do, who we are, where we are, how we do our thing, and all of that, right? And tell you about student programs and all of that. And Kris and I will both give you a little bit of our backgrounds, and then we'll open it up to a conversation. So you can ask whatever questions you want to ask. This is your time. We want to make it as interactive as possible. So I might gloss over some things in the presentation, and then during the Q&A period, if you wanted to dive into that a little more, then we can do so. Kris, is there anything you want to say off top?
Nope, go ahead. This sounds great.
All right. And I'm looking in the chat box. Lots of different majors, which is good, which is really good. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm glad you guys are hearing about this early, especially as sophomores and freshmen, because we have a lot of student programs. And it takes a while to apply for them, and it's best to know about it now because the deadlines are pretty far out from when the actual programs start. So it's good to hear about it early, so you have this in the back of your mind when it's time to apply. All right. So if you don't have any questions, guys, I'm going to go ahead and launch right in. So the three people that I can see, the four people, if you can nod your head and say yes to allow me to go, or no, you have a question. All right, cool. So allow me to go. Here we go. Can you see my screen? Great, thank you. Since it's a small group, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to unmute and ask a question. I always say that at the beginning, nobody ever does. You're welcome to hold your questions till the end, but just know that you're fine asking a question. All right, who am I? I am a U.S. Foreign Service officer. That's what we call our diplomatic corps, foreign service officers. We have foreign service officer generalists and foreign service officer specialists, and we're all considered U.S. diplomats. I've been in the department for over 15 years, right? And so as a diplomat, what we do is we're the ones who work abroad in our U.S. embassies and our consulates overseas. And we rotate around every like 2 to 3 years on average. We move from place to place, and that's how we do our career. So my career has been, when I started off in China. I was in the U.S. consulate in Shenyang, China, in the northeast part of the country. Then I went to the Vatican. I was in our U.S. embassy to the Holy See there, basically living in Rome, Italy. Then I went back to D.C. for a couple of tours. Then I went out to Belize, which is in Central America. It's a Caribbean country out there. And then I went to Mexico City. And now I'm here. I'm based in Louisiana. As I said earlier, I'm the diplomat in residence for Louisiana. I'm responsible for Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. My colleague Kris is responsible for all of Texas. Our roles are to recruit on behalf of the Department of State and to talk to students and to other professionals and organizations about our careers and our student programs and opportunities. Usually what I like to do up front is to give my bottom line up front, which is threefold. One is we have amazing careers, right? Just hands down. We have very, very unique careers. Like, for example, when I think about my life, I think about it in terms of lives. right? Like, so I was working in China for 2 years. I had a Chinese life, right? I was there eating Chinese food, speaking Chinese, surrounded by Chinese people, learning about Chinese culture and history, experiencing their weddings and their funerals, their traditions. I had that full immersion experience. So I had a full Chinese life at that point. Then I went to Italy, so I had my Italian life at that point. So now I'm eating pasta and eating pizza every day. Now I'm driving past the Colosseum on the way to work. I'm exploring Italy, listening to Italian music. All of this, speaking Italian. That was my Italian life of my Italian period of my life, right? Then when I was in Belize, it's a Caribbean country. So now I'm like almost every weekend out on the islands, like checking out the Caribbean and listening to reggae and living my best Belizean life. Then I was in Mexico, right? And I'm sure you get the point, right? So now I'm eating tacos and listening to mariachi bands and living my best Mexican life. And now I'm back home in Louisiana. So I'm actually from here. My mother was from Lafayette, Louisiana. My dad's from Mississippi, but I grew up in Louisiana. But I'm a military brat. My parents were both in the army, so I was born overseas in Germany, and then we moved to Louisiana when I was like in second grade. Then moved again later to another military base in New York at one point, and then back to Louisiana. So the whole idea, the whole concept of the Foreign Service came quite naturally to me. The idea of international experience, of moving around every now and then, of living in a public service family, that all came quite naturally to me. And so that's part of the reason why I joined the Foreign Service. Now, who is she? I would like for Kris to go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Kris Sivertson, and I am a U.S. Foreign Service Officer Specialist. Now, my specialty is a little bit different than Nathan's. I'm a Diplomatic Security Special Agent. Overseas, we're called Regional Security Officers, and we're the men and women who are protecting our U.S. embassies, our facilities there, our information, and our people. I've been with the U.S. Department of State for over 22 years. I'm originally from Oregon, a very, very, very tiny, tiny town in Oregon. And, I had no idea what a great big world there was out there. I moved to Washington, D.C. on a whim after college. A friend of mine had a job with a contracting company. And she said, "Hey, Kris, come out here. This is great. Get a job." So I threw my resume in with the contracting company, and they said, "Report to diplomatic security and work in the recruitment division." And I was like, "Okay, I can do that. Sure, I can hire people. I'm right out of school." And I was an assistant. I wasn't the head recruiter or anything. So I helped hire diplomatic security special agents, security engineering officers, and diplomatic couriers, and put together a program because they hadn't hired in many years. And as I watched those men and women move through training, and I talked to some of the agents and the trainers and the personnel, I'm like, this is the best job in the world. This
Right.
is so cool. I want to do that. I want to do that job. And I worked really hard to get that job. I studied, I practiced my writing, I read current, you'd find me on the weekend. I was one of those nerdy kids. I'd be at the library. I'd be studying, The Economist and anything I could on international affairs, because I thought I had some catching up to do, because I came from such a small town and I didn't really have that international experience. Diplomatic security special agents, we start off in the United States as our first tour. So I was in Washington, D.C., learning to do protection, which is bodyguard work, kind of like what the Secret Service does, learning to do criminal investigations. And then I went to Portuguese language school to learn some skills in language, and went to Brazil. And yes, I did participate in Carnival in the big Rio Sambadrome. So that's part of my Brazilian life. And I, after that, went to Luanda, Angola. I've been the regional security officer in Peshawar, Pakistan, Madrid, Spain, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. I've also been assigned to a number of domestic assignments and was fortunate enough to be selected to go to one of our national defense universities, the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama, to receive my master's degree in strategic studies. So, coming from that small town in Oregon, you look at your life and you look, you're like, wow, who could imagine this? Well, you guys are here. You can imagine this. This is something that you all can do. This is all attainable. And we're going to tell you how to do that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nathan.
Thank you. Thank you, Kris. So quick quiz for you guys, and please unmute and shout out an answer really quick because we have to move on. But what language do you think is spoken in Brazil? Anybody?
Portuguese.
Portuguese.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Lane. What language do you think is spoken in Angola? Anybody?
Portuguese.
Absolutely. So Kris got her Portuguese on and then went from South America and using the same skills, right, Kris? Went on to Africa and
That's right.
moving.
And I
Yep.
learned Portuguese from Spanish because I was a Spanish major, Spanish and political science in college.
Awesome.
So they messed up all my Spanish and taught me Portuguese. And then I
Right.
went back to Spain and Argentina and got that back. So I speak a mixture of everything.
Got it. Got it. You should hear my Chinese and my Italian and Spanish mix up. Not pretty. Not pretty at all. So who we are. You heard about who we are, me and Kris. Now who we are as an institution, right? So we are the nation's oldest cabinet agency. And by cabinet agency, I mean like the departments of, right? Like the Department of Defense, Department of Education, Department of Treasury, whatever. The US Department of State is the oldest agency. We're the first. And we're the lead foreign affairs agency. So anything related to diplomacy and international relations on the federal government level, that has to flow through the US Department of State. One of our main duties is to protect the interests of US citizens, especially US citizens living abroad. And some of our earliest diplomats include people like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and I leave these photos on this slide to show what our diplomacy looks like at the beginning, right? In the earlier days, and actually up until a long time, it was a pretty homogenous group, right? People used to say the State Department and the Foreign Service especially was pale, male, and from Yale. So basically thinking white men from elite institutions in the Northeast. But that's not who we are today. One of our main goals right now is to try to recruit for diversity, right? And that means gender diversity. It means racial and ethnic diversity. It means socioeconomic diversity and geographic diversity. We want to make sure that the Foreign Service, our diplomatic corps, truly looks like and reflects all of the United States of America. Our Secretary of State recently said that if we don't take full advantage of our country's diversity, it's kind of like fighting with one hand tied behind our back. We're not taking full advantage of one of our greatest assets as a country. And all academic disciplines are useful. Speaking of our Secretary of State, this is our boss, Secretary Tony Blinken. His role is basically to be the president's right-hand person on anything foreign policy related. So he's the president's principal advisor on foreign policy issues. He coordinates foreign policy for the US government. He implements the president's foreign policy decisions overseas and protects US interests abroad. Our previous Secretary of State was named Mike Pompeo. Before him, there was a gentleman named Rex Tillerson, but you may also remember Secretaries of State like John Kerry and Hillary Clinton. Before them, there was Condoleezza Rice and Secretary General Colin Powell and others before them, but I came in under Colin Powell. Where we are, so we are a truly global organization. We're located in 191 countries, and we have 276 posts. Another rapid quiz real quick. Unmute and shout the answer. Let me know, what is the difference because when I say 276 posts, I mean our embassies and our consulates and other missions. But what's the difference between an embassy and a US consulate? Rapid quiz, rapid quiz. Not you, Kris. Anybody else but Kris. And unmute and let your answer fly. Unmute. Nobody knows. Not even you, Margaret, nor you, Irene, nor you, Robert Walker. Where's Lane? Where are y'all? Nobody has a guess? The difference between an embassy and a consulate. All right.
One would be an official diplomatic outpost versus another more informal, or
Good guess. Good guess. Kind of. Not really informal though. But okay, I'll tell you because we have to move on. So our embassies are our main presence overseas in another country. So our embassy is our main location, typically located in the capital city of whatever country we have a mission to, right? A U.S. consulate, you can think of it as a branch of an embassy. It's a mini embassy in another important city in that same country. So, for example, in China, our embassy was obviously located in Beijing, right, in the capital. But other important cities had US consulates, like we had a consulate in Shanghai, we had a consulate in Hong Kong, one in Chengdu, one in Shenyang, one in Guangzhou. So that's the difference between an embassy and a consulate. There's still diplomatic posts. The embassy is the main spot, consulates are the branches. We're also headquartered in DC, in this building here. And most of us have to go back and work in this building at some point in our career, right? And we have passport agencies and field offices located throughout the United States. This is a very broad sketch of the chain of command from the president on down to the embassy level. So it goes from the president to the secretary of state to the ambassador of your embassy, who's also called the chief of mission, then down to the deputy chief of mission, right under the ambassador. So about 65 to 70% of all of our ambassadors at any given time are career foreign service officers. So people like Kris and myself who've risen through the ranks and eventually made it to that level to become an ambassador. The other 30 to 35% are people who either know the president personally or maybe donated a lot of money to the president's campaign, and they become politically appointed ambassadors. The deputy chief of mission is almost always somebody who is a career foreign service officer. This is what it looks like inside of the department, of the embassy. So it goes from the ambassador to the deputy chief of mission. And these are the different sections that you'll find typically in an embassy. If you look all the way to the right of that slide, you'll see it says other agencies. What that means is any other US government agency who wants a presence in that foreign country, an official presence, they fall under the chief of mission authority in the embassy, and they'll have an office at the embassy somewhere. So like USAID typically is out there, Department of Commerce sometimes, Department of Defense quite usually, Department of Agriculture, it depends, and all the other ones, right? The other sections are the State Department sections. So in the Foreign Service, we have two main tracks: Foreign Service Officer Generalists, Foreign Service Officer Specialists. The blue boxes on top are most of the generalist positions. We have 5 different cones in the generalist. We have management, as you see, we have consular, we have public diplomacy, we have economics and political. Then we also have, as far as our specialists go, we have 19 different tracks. And the specialists typically are in positions that provide support to the mission itself. Not as much as an outward-facing role, but more of an inward-facing role to make sure that things are running well within the mission. And so regional security, that's what Kris was talking about. That's one of those specialists, but also we have specialists like we have medical professionals, we have IT professionals, We have human resources professionals. We have financial management professionals. We have facilities management managers. We have 19 different tracks that are within our specialties. Oh, I meant to tell you, you see at the bottom right, careers.state.gov, that is our website. If anything that I can tell you here today, you can find it there and much more. So just make sure you pay attention to that website, careers.state.gov, and also the link that Kris put in the box earlier that you can register at. If you register there, then you'll be part of our recruitment database, and you can also set up one-on-one meetings with Kris and I. You'll see my email at the end, and Kris can give you her email as well. So the 5 different cones, we call them cones of the generalists, are management, counselor, PD, and econ and political. Management is more inward facing. The management officer oversees all of those sections you see there, like human resources, financial management, logistics, IT, medical, all of that. Counselor officers typically do 2 different functions. One is they do visas. So whenever a foreigner wants to apply to come to the United States, they have to apply for a visa typically. And the consular officer is the one who interviews these people to see if they're eligible to receive the visa that they're applying for. The second main function of consular officers are American citizen services, and that's one of our most important functions as well. So all of us have to do consular work. All generalists have to do consular work within their first 2 tours, so we can learn this. And American citizen services are trying to assist Americans overseas who run into issues or who need assistance. So like, I know you may have seen on the movies, right? Like if there's an American citizen overseas who does something wrong and goes to jail, and somebody from the embassy has to go visit them and make sure they're being treated fairly, that is the consular people. They also deal with death cases, unfortunately, and even birth cases too. If an American citizen is born overseas, the consular officer gives them a consular report of birth abroad and their American citizenship and all of that. Public diplomacy. 2 main sections here too. Public diplomacy are one section is dealing with the press. So they're our main our spokespeople for the embassy. They're our main point of contact with journalists. They arrange interviews with journalists who want to speak to senior level officials. They themselves are allowed to speak on the record and get our position out into the public. The other half of their work is called cultural affairs. So that's showcasing America's like soft power, right? Showing our US culture. So for example, say you're assigned in Mozambique and you want to bring over like a US jazz band from New Orleans to Mozambique to showcase US jazz music. That would be the public diplomacy section that does that. Econ and political, there's 2 different cones, but they do roughly the same type of work. We call them our reporting positions. So they're the ones who are writing information back to Washington about what's going on in the country. And how they do this is they become experts on certain issues, whatever's in their portfolios. And they do a lot of reading. They read what was written before, they read up on the country, but they also meet a lot of people. They meet people from a wide range of society, whether it's government officials, civil society, religious figures, academia, whatever. They're meeting people, cultivating contacts, and trying to gain a deep understanding of that country that they're in, so that when things happen, they can reach out to these people to try to understand what's going on behind the scenes or whatever, trying to get that deeper understanding and writing reports back to Washington to explain to decision makers in DC about what's really happening on the ground. So that's one of their main roles, is doing that in their different spheres. And also another role is sending information back to that country from DC. So if Washington wants to say I'm posted in Mexico, and if Washington wants to ask the Mexican government to vote along with us on a UN resolution on some Security Council issue, then the message would come to me first as a political officer, and I would go to their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, SRE, and pass the message. So it's a lot of information passing back and forth. Kris kind of explained about RSO, Regional Security Officer, at the beginning. Kris, was there anything you want to add right here?
I'll say the regional security officer, this is made up a number of different specialties. You have your diplomatic security special agent, your security engineering officer, which is one of our engineering positions that we have, and also your security technical specialists, which are the men and women who install and maintain and teach and do instruction on maintaining our security equipment at our US embassies. And unlike many of the other specialists, the regional security officer also has a pretty large outward-facing role, as well as an internal role, especially with the host nation. You are the US government's representative to all the law enforcement agencies of that nation. And so if somebody from the Houston Police Department wants to speak to the police department in Angola, that would travel through me, from the Houston Police Department to me, to the police department in Angola to get whatever information they required. And there are some other subtleties to that when I have other law enforcement partners at a post, but you may be the only one there. So it does have a large outward-facing role, especially in crisis management and preparation. So we do have diplomatic relations with an extensive group of people as well, but still different than the economic and political officer.
Thank you. All right, this slide talks about our different opportunities that we have. I've already spoken about the top 2 bullets extensively. So I said we have Foreign Service Officer Generalists, and those are the 5 different cones. Remember, consular, economic, management, political, public diplomacy. We have Foreign Service Officer Specialists, IT people, engineers, healthcare, special agents, admin. We have 19 different tracks. That's a short list of it though, right there. We have civil service positions, and those are positions of folks who work for the State Department, but based domestically. So a lot of them will be in the DC area, but there's based all throughout the US, like in our passport agencies and our field offices and such. We have Consular Fellows Program. So this is for people who speak certain languages that are in demand, like Mandarin, Portuguese, Arabic, and Spanish. And what it does is it brings you into the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service Officer Generalist up top in the consular cone, but it's for a limited non-career appointment. So it's for a maximum of 5 years. Although many of our consular fellows, after they taste that lifestyle, because when you're a consular fellow, you're basically a consular officer, and there's not much difference between you and any other Foreign Service officer. So after they taste that lifestyle, then they take the exam, which we'll speak about in a second, and then later become a Foreign Service Officer Generalist for the career appointment. Then we have student programs, which is where I'm going to next. We have internships, fellowships, and study abroad programs.
Mr. Bland,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna give you a little curveball. I'm gonna ask a question in the middle of the presentation. I hope you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
First, I just wanted to say thank you for coming out to speak with us. It truly is an honor to meet you and to hear this presentation from you, even in the virtual space that we currently see ourselves in. But I had a couple of questions regarding some of the stuff we said towards the beginning.
Yep.
So first off, you said that your boss is the Secretary of State. How do you, okay, so I guess for context, it seems that a lot of the stuff that you do requires adaptability, what with going between different countries, coming back to the United States, and especially having to shift between different bosses every 4 or 8 years or whatever the period is. How do you handle this transition between the powers that be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are career people, right? We're career officers, and we take an oath to the Constitution. So our job functions remain relatively the same. We are we're promoting U.S. foreign policy. So whatever administration that there is in power, then we then that's the administration that shapes the foreign policy, and we do that. You know, we are the ones to promote our U.S. foreign policy. And I've been in since 2006, right? So I've seen several different administrations come and go, you know, and overall though, like on the ground, our work remains relatively stable, even though, you know, on top there's different priorities that come. Things shift, you know, like the attention shifts from one place to another at times, but overall, you know, our work remains fairly steady, you know. And we as career foreign service officers, we have to remain apolitical. You know, we have to support whatever the U.S. government position in our public life, at least, you know, is at that time. um you have to remain completely flexible, because not only is our top boss, you know, Secretary Blinken changed, he just got on 2 months ago, and he'll change in, you know, maybe 4 years, maybe less than that, don't know. But our own like immediate supervisors will change, like within a year or so, and if not them, we'll be moving. You know, so there is constant movement, but we have strategies. We have what's called our work requirement statements. You know, we have mission goals, we have bureau goals. You know, so those are more long term. You know, like we have some embassy goals that are for 5-year stretch. You know, so it doesn't matter who's leaving, who's coming. We're still focused on those goals, and you still need to continue working at that. You know, and your successor needs to do the same. So we have strategies. You know, just because people are leaving and coming and going, it doesn't mean that everything just changes overnight. You know, we have long-term strategic goals that we're trying to meet. Does that answer the question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Also, this isn't super relevant, but I just wanted to point out, I actually grew up in Mississippi, so I'm sort of from the same region. I know there's not a lot of folks that I see who came from Mississippi or Louisiana, so it's nice to see another
Yeah,
from that area of the country.
absolutely. Thanks. Kris, was there anything else you want to add on that last question? Very good.
No, I think that took care of it. I'm putting some links into the chat for your next section here.
Cool. Thank you.
Speaking of which, there are several questions in the chat. I don't know if they wanted to.
I'm watching them. I'm waiting till we have a pause, and then we'll be able to answer all of those.
All right.
Gotcha.
Pause coming up soon. Let me run through the student programs. That the top bullet, those graduate school fellowships, those are our most valuable student programs, in my opinion. And the reason why they're incredibly valuable is, especially if you know this is what you want to do, if you know you want to come to the Foreign Service, these pay for 2 years of schooling. They pay for 2 paid internships, 1 domestic and 1 abroad, and they bring you in. You have a guaranteed job when you finish, when you graduate school. You have a guaranteed job in the Foreign Service. So the top 2, Pickering and Rangel, those are graduate school fellowships. You apply for it the year before you plan to go to graduate school. So if you're planning on going to graduate school in the fall of 2022, you would apply this fall, the fall of 2021. And it does everything I told you just now. It pays for 2 years of graduate school, up to $42,000 a year. It gives you 2 of those internships, 1 domestic, 1 abroad. The only difference between the 2 programs is that if you're doing a Pickering, you'll do your domestic internship at the State Department. If you do a Rangel, you'll do your domestic internship with Congress. The other ones will be abroad at one of our embassies. And it brings you in as a Foreign Service Officer Generalist at the end. So that's a really, really good deal. I wish I had known about this one when I was coming through. Then I wouldn't have had so many graduate school student loans. The other one, the Foreign Affairs Information Technology Fellowship, very similar, except you can apply for this one as a sophomore. I know we have sophomores on the line. So if you're a sophomore now, you're actually a little bit late, because the application deadline was in the spring, was earlier, a couple of months ago. But if you're a freshman, think about it, especially if you're doing one of these majors. So if you're doing an IT related major, like computer science or cybersecurity, something like that, anything IT related, you apply for it either as a sophomore or as a senior. So as a sophomore, if you apply and if you get it, you'll get your junior and senior year of undergrad paid for. You'll get the 2 paid internships, 1 domestic and 1 abroad, and you'll be brought into the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service IT specialist. If you apply as a senior, then of course you'll get the 2 years of grad school paid for and all of that other stuff. Wrangle Summer Enrichment Program, that is a summer program, an academic program that will send you to Howard University to study a few courses in international relations and help you to network and to meet people who are working on global affairs. It's also seen as a stepping stone to get the actual Wrangle Fellowship. Our biggest program is the unpaid State Department internship program. The thing to note about that is that the deadlines to apply for those, remember I was glad that you're here as freshman and sophomore. The deadline to apply for it is actually a good 8 months in advance of when the internship actually starts. So our summer interns who are starting this summer, they actually had to apply by last September. And one point on that is that there are proposals in front of Congress right now that may change the very nature of that program. So stay tuned and we'll see about that. The U.S. Foreign Service Internship Program is also another good one. It's merit and need-based though. And what it does is it gives you 2 consecutive summer internships paid, all expenses paid, 1 domestic and 1 abroad. The Presidential Management Fellowship, this is for graduate students, so y'all are a good way from that. But if you're a graduate student in your last year of grad school and you want to come into the federal government as a civil servant in a pretty high rank, and it moves you up pretty quickly, that is a program to keep your mind on later. We have the Virtual Student Federal Service, which allows you to do an internship virtually during your school year. You apply for it during the summer. You'll apply to a particular project, and you'll work about 10 hours a week during your school year. Study abroad opportunities. I wish I had known about these when I was coming up as well. One is the Gilman Scholarship, which is also merit and need-based. If you're a Pell Grant recipient or an active duty military dependent, you can apply for this one. And this one helps to defray some of the costs of studying abroad. So if you're already planning on doing a semester abroad and you need help paying for it, this one can pay up to $5,000. And if you're studying a language while you're abroad, you can actually apply for an additional amount of up to $3,000 more. So that's a good one. Critical Language Scholarship, that one, it'll send you abroad during a summer for like 8 to 10 weeks. And it's an intensive language training program. And all of these, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of these are seen as stepping stones to get into the State Department eventually. We notice that a lot of our new Foreign Service officers have had some touch points with us in the past, like some of those student programs. The main way to get into the State Department, into the Foreign Service Generalist track at least, is through a test, the Foreign Service Officer Test. The test is offered 3 times a year. It's free to take, absolutely free. You can take it as many times as you want, except you can only take it once a year, right? It's not an easy test, right? It's a multi-stage test. So you start off with like a multiple choice part of the test, and then if you pass that, then you may get invited to the Foreign Service oral assessment. Then if you pass that, then you need to get your security and medical clearances. And then you get put on a registry in hopes to be called off of the registry to enter a Foreign Service class. The only requirements to take the test, there's no particular major or anything like that. You just have to be at least 20 years of age and a US citizen. That's it. Those are the only requirements to take the test. As I said, I'm going to gloss over some of these things. And if you want to talk more about it later, we can. Foreign Service Specialists, you remember I mentioned there were 19 different tracks. One of the main differences between specialists and generalists is that to become a generalist, you have to go through that test process. Even if you have one of those fellowships that I mentioned earlier, in order to stay in the Foreign Service, you still have to cross this test. You still have to pass that. We say that we recruit for diversity, but we hire based on merit. Everyone has to overcome this hurdle. Specialists, you have to apply to the specific job vacancy announcement on usajobs.gov whenever that job opens. So say, for example, if you wanted to be a human resources specialist, for the department, you'd have to wait until that vacancy opened. And there'll be an announcement that comes out. It may say open 2 to 3 weeks, and then it'll close. And they'll accept applications during that period. And if your applications meet the minimum qualifications, then you go on and do mainly the same steps as the generalist process. You have to do an oral assessment, then you have to get your clearances, medical and security clearances, and then you get the suitability review and you get put on the list to get brought into the Foreign Service. Some of our benefits beyond just seeing the world include language training, and I'm talking about paid language training. So when I started, they actually paid me to go learn Chinese for 10 months before sending me out to my first post. Same when I went to Mexico, I had to learn Spanish for 6 months first. And same when I went to Italy, you get the idea. Paid language training. We also get nice housing. When we're posted abroad, we get government provided nice housing. Whenever you have kids later on in life, their education gets paid for when you're overseas. So they get sent to some of the nicest international schools that in that country. We get hardship allowances and differentials. We get our health benefits. We have our own 401k type of program. It's called the Thrift Savings Plan. And we get holidays and leave. We get our own holidays, and we get local holidays for wherever you are. And with that, I will wrap up. This is my contact information slide. That's my email address. I have a Facebook page. That's it's DIR Central South, Diplomat in Residence Central South. And that's that same link that Kris had put in the box earlier. So with that, I will stop sharing and come to your questions.
So we have a number of questions in the chat. So why don't we revisit some of those for a minute? One of the first questions I saw, I answered one in there for you all if you didn't catch it, on internships, and are they virtual or are they in person? Due to COVID, for the last I don't know, probably the last year, everything went virtual. But as soon as they can, normally those are not virtual, okay? The virtual student federal service is the only virtual internship. Everything else is in person. So Nathan, one question in the chat, and I'll have you answer first, and then I'll give my spin on it. Did you have a favorite place among the places you served, or any memorable experiences?
Sure, I can. I'll take the first swing at that one. My favorite place to serve was actually Belize, believe it or not. As I mentioned, that was a Caribbean country, and it was just nice. So of course, I said I lived in China, I lived in Italy, in other places. Belize just wasn't as foreign as some of those other locations. Right? It was kind of like the culture was kind of like Louisiana almost, so it felt comfortable. And it was a small town. I'm a small town kind of guy. I grew up in Leesville. So like I'm not so into the roams of the world, like those big cities where you don't really get to know people. The capital of Belize had like 18,000 people. It's a small town called Belmopan. We got to know just about everybody, right? I mean, like, people are just so connected. We were in a church, I was in this church choir, and it through those connections we made more and more connections. We were just integrated very well into the society of Belize. And even now, like I think my Facebook list on my personal page, is probably about a quarter Belizean, just because of how well we integrated there into that community, which was more difficult to do in Shenyang and Rome and Mexico. Those bigger cities where it's not that home, that small town feel. Give it to you, Kris.
That's a great answer. So I get this question a lot when I'm speaking to different audiences. And for me, I also, like Nathan, identify in different, you kind of compartmentalize your different tours and assignments and experiences and those groups of friends and people that you made. And so I find it very difficult to pick a favorite, because I've been to some places that were pretty tough to live. I mean, but the work that we did there was so important, right? When I was in Africa, at the time we were there, they had just finished a civil war and the country was covered in mines. And we were trying to work with the UN and other partners to get food and basic shelter and demining teams so that refugees could return. And before I left, I got to witness one of the refugee returns. They hadn't been able to come back to their country for 10 years. They'd been in a neighboring country. And so, while it was more difficult to live, in Angola, is what I'm talking about, I met my husband there, and I, have the closest friends there because, again, that tight-knit community, despite, some tough circumstances for living, and the work we did was so valuable. So I can't pick a favorite between mine, and I kind of say I leave a little bit of myself in each country. And, you kind of always, you always resonate. You see something and you're reading it, you're like, oh, an article about Madrid, and you always perk up and you're like, oh, I know about that. And you're like, oh, I've been there. I've learned about these issues. I've met people, so you kind of reconnect with that space every time that, it comes back into your orbit. And so for me, I don't have a favorite. I have fondness in different ways for all of them. So that's how I answer that question. And so our next question
Hold on, Kris.
Yeah,
Kris,
yeah.
One other point real quick. So when I spoke about Belize, that was my favorite post living wise. But my favorite post work wise was actually back in DC when I was on in the Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs. So in the main headquarters, we have this whole bureau. It's called the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. And there we work on some very, very interesting issues. So the issues that I was working on in that period were ocean pollution, basically. And I was the head of the US delegations to these two different international treaties that we have that we're a party to, we're a signatory to. One of them was called the London Convention. The other one was called the Cartagena Convention. And so I would have a team of people from throughout the government who had interests in those treaties, like people from EPA, NOAA, the Navy, Coast Guard, all throughout the government who had interest in oceans issues. Because, issues like the ocean and the environmental issues, they don't care about borders. So it depends on international cooperation, right? So we were going to these meetings like at the IMO, the International Maritime Organization in London, which is it's a part of the UN. So we'd be in this big delegation filled room with all the different countries' delegations, and their little mics, and I'd be the one at the microphone, speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, just like you would see at the UN. It was just that was one of my favorite work-wise too. I like the issues like those common good issues, like issues that affect all of us as humans. Those are the ones that I like to work on the most.
That's an awesome answer. So the next one was, what is the most difficult aspect of transitioning between each post or country? So a couple of things on good news about that for you all, that we have classes before you go out and regional studies. We have a lot of resources. So before you even bid or look to accept the assignment, a lot about the country, about the job you're going to be doing. You've probably talked to 10 people while you were in the process of getting the job. And we do this process about a year out. So you have a lot of time to learn and prepare. And that doesn't even count if you have to go to language school. So there, you also receive a work sponsor and a social sponsor to help you and your family acclimate to the new environment. Those terrible questions like, oh, where do you buy groceries? Where's the grocery store? How do I drive to work? Which way do I go? Where is it? This is a time before GPS, guys. Believe it or not, it didn't always exist. But how do you get to work? How do you use the bus system if that's permitted in that country? How do you ride the subway? Where do you go to get pet food if you had a pet you were bringing with you? And then the social sponsor will also, introduce you to some people. They'll usually give you a hot meal your first or second night there and have you over to their house. With the expectation be that you're going to pay it forward when somebody else comes, right? When somebody new comes in, and you're going to help orient them. So, and then a work sponsor does the same type of thing at the office. They show you around the embassy. They help you get situated, help you get set up, help you get an appointment with the regional security office, and help you check in to the embassy. So you're not out there on your own. So that's the good news. Everybody experiences a little bit of culture shock, and we receive training in how to deal with that as well. And it doesn't matter if it was your first tour or your last tour. There's always a moment that I think that happens. You're wildly excited. It's a new country. It's really awesome. And then after a while, it gets difficult. You're like, oh, I'm frustrated about something. Well, you have your local national staff who you work with, who you can ask questions to. And you can say, hey, am I making a cultural misstep here? Or this happened to me. Help me explain, or help me, understand the context of what just happened. Like, for example, a colleague of mine mentioned to me that she got glared at in the grocery store at the checkout line. And she had no idea why. And she couldn't figure it out, but it was just like, dude, they just hate Americans? So what is it? Well, apparently you're supposed to weigh your own fruit and vegetables and put the sticker on yourself before you go up. So she was holding up the whole grocery line, and everybody was mad at her because she was making the cashier do it and take extra time. Small cultural misstep. And, as soon as you can fix it, but, a conversation with her local staff helped fix that. And, it had the potential to be a misunderstanding about, an attitude toward an American or a foreigner in the area. And no, it wasn't that. It was just that, we didn't know. And so there's always a little bit of cultural adjustment time for you and your family when you're coming in. So that's what I would say on that one. I don't know if Nathan, you have anything else. We have a lot more questions.
Nope,
Okay.
that was good. Thank you.
Sure. Are there any certifications or education you need to fulfill before you can work in a different department?
I think that may have come from my explanation about the oceans and polar affairs question. Okay.
Yeah.
The answer to that is no. There's no like certifications or education that you need, because you learn your job on the job basically. And so the State Department throws you into these new positions, and they expect you to get read up on it and become experts on it quite quickly. So when I went to that position, the one on ocean and polar affairs, I didn't know anything about like ocean fertilization, about dredging, ocean dredging, and all these different like ocean terms and techniques that I needed to know about. But what I did was I had to learn. I had to read up on what happened on my predecessors' tours. Like I can look at their previous cables. I schedule courtesy calls with individuals in NOAA and EPA and the real experts about these issues, so that they can explain to me what everything is, so that I can sound credible when I'm talking about it. I took a trip down to Mississippi, down to Vicksburg, Mississippi. Lane, I don't know if you're from there, but there's a big U.S. Army Corps of Engineers section there. So I went to Vicksburg and they brought me out on a dredge ship. So I learned about what it's like to dredge canals. Did you know that you have to dredge canals and waterways quite frequently to make sure that it stays a certain depth to let ships pass through there? That's the kind of stuff I learned, out there in real life. So and the reason why I had to do all of that was because those were some of the issues we were dealing with in those treaties that we dealt with. That there were requirements about where you can dump the material that you dredge from the ground, in the ocean, and we were talking about those types of issues and negotiating on those. So long answer short, no, you don't have to have the knowledge before you get there. But that's why that test at the beginning is a pretty high barrier, because they're making sure that they're hiring people who can get up to speed quite easily. They're hiring people who have that intellectual curiosity, who want to learn, who are capable of doing these things, and we get out there and do it.
Additionally, I would say that that's true across all the specialties as well, because the same thing happens in diplomatic security when I go take a job in our headquarters or at one of our different offices, and I'm not an expert in that, but I need to become one really quickly. And you have a lot coming at you in the very beginning, and it takes you a little while. I mean, that's like Nathan and I here trying to be a recruiter.
Even in this
Right?
job. Yeah.
Okay,
Even in this
we are
job.
not professional recruiters, in case you guys hadn't noticed. We are professional diplomats, but we can talk to people and we have these skills and we had the ability to learn, right? And that's why, you know, I mentioned lifelong learning. That's what keeps this job fresh for me, and why I've been doing it 22 years, because every couple of years I get a new challenge that's exciting, that pushes my boundaries, that I learn something phenomenal, that I get to represent the American people in a new way, and I gain additional skill sets. So for me, that was really, you know, one of the reasons that I keep doing this after so many years. And I do recognize we're at the hour, Margaret. And so if we need to wrap it up, please let us know. If not, I think there's probably one more question in the chat we could answer here.
I think we'd be all right with the final question. We really appreciate you
Okay.
taking time to answer.
So the final question, Nathan, and I'm going to give it to you first, is they're asking, what does an average day look like?
Oh,
Yep, that's a tough one. And
It
it's
is
a
a
little
tough
bit more involved than that. But basically, it comes down to what's an average day?
right. So one of the things that we hear as soon as we get hired on, almost every question we ask in our orientation is, it depends. You know, it depends, because like we're truly a global organization, and you know what goes on in our embassy in Paris is not going to be the same thing that goes on in our embassy in Micronesia, right? I mean, there's just so much that depends. Like as as a generalist, I've done all 5 of the career tracks, all 5 of the cones. So my average day as a consular officer was nowhere near the same as my average day as a political or economic officer or a management officer, or you know, the public affairs thing. So it really depends. But to generalize, what I can say is we do a lot of meetings, especially in non-COVID times. There were a lot of you know, in-person meetings. We do a lot of emails. There's a lot that goes on with the email, like the Outlook thing, right? If you're a consular officer, you'll be doing a lot of interviews, especially early on in your career. You'll be at the window a lot, just interviewing people to figure out if they deserve this visa. If you're a public diplomacy officer, you'll do a lot of speaking to journalists, as I mentioned earlier. You know, you'll be planning events, constant planning, figuring out how to spend your finite amount of resources to advance our goals. You know, if you're a management officer, there's loads of things that can go on, you know, during your day, dealing with finances, logistics, human resources, people complaining, people needing things from you. You know, you're running you're like the chief operating officer of the embassy. Lots of things. In this job, my day to day is a lot of this Zooming. I do a lot of one-on-one meetings. I meet with I have office hours like on Monday and Tuesday for the general public. I'm based at Tulane University, so I have office hours for them on Thursdays and Fridays. And then I do a lot of info sessions like this. We do a lot of career fairs. Man, we had so many career fairs this past semester, where we're just doing, and all of them are virtual right now, so we can bounce around. I know Kris has only Texas, even though Texas is huge, right? Um, I have Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas, so I can bounce around from like Arkansas to Mississippi, back to Louisiana, all in the same day, because we're doing it all virtually. You know, so that's what our days like, and still a lot of emails, even in this job. You know, we do a lot of outreach, but there's still a lot of internal coordination that you have to do.
And I would agree. And the one thing I'll add is the coordination piece. So remember that, think back to that slide where we listed all the different sections at the embassy and all the different agencies who are there. Well, remember, it's a lot of coordination because you have to coordinate on behalf of the taxpayers, the US government effort, right? No one operates in a vacuum. You have to coordinate, and to make sure we're following the strategy that we set. And so there's a lot of internal coordination back with Washington, to make sure that the programs are done in a correct manner, that we're using our resources and our influence in the best way on behalf of the American people. So coordination is a huge aspect within that. So other than that, I would agree. A specialist job is a little bit different, but the skill sets are about the same. In a regional security officer, I would come in the morning and I want to see what happened overnight. So I'm going to do a lot of reading and checking up on what happened overnight, checking up on my guard force, my Marines, seeing if there were any incidents that occurred, what's going to be planned for the day. I rely heavily on our administrative staff, because we're all very, very scheduled. We have a lot of things that happen. So our administrative professionals really keep us moving with the right pieces of paper and to the right areas and make sure all our logistics are planned. So that's a really valuable career track if any of you have interest in that. So it is also open for application, by the way. But at any rate, I think that I've really enjoyed talking with you all, and I encourage you to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat again. I am your diplomat in residence for Texas. So feel free to reach out to me when you have questions about student programs, internships, or if you have questions about employment and what you might do. We have a lot of employee videos. We're doing a lot of national level virtual programming right now, and registering with the tiny URL that you received will help you connect with that programming. A word of advice, do not hit general on that. Make sure that you are specific to what you want to learn about. Otherwise, your inbox could fill up fairly quickly, and you can elect also not to receive anything. So we're here for you. I'm in your time zone. Nathan is also here if you have questions for him, but we appreciate your time tonight. And thank you to Margaret for organizing this, and to Alexis for organizing this greater effort. So thank you all. And Nathan, do you have anything else?
Just two last points right quick. One, we mentioned something earlier called the 13 dimensions. That's hugely important in the process of applying for your internships, your fellowships, and the Foreign Service in general. That those are the qualities that are deemed essential to having a successful diplomatic career, and almost any career. Like, it's qualities like oral communication, written communication, leadership, your judgment, decision making, all of that kind of stuff. So check that out. Make sure you know what those 13 dimensions are. Make sure whenever you do your applications, you speak to those, because that's what they're looking for. Second point, Kris, there was a question, one more question that it was more directed towards you. Absolutely directed towards you. It was about Oregon, basically. About can I ask what town you grew up in Oregon you grew up in?
Yes, a very, very small place called Roseburg. It's a very exciting town in the mountains of Oregon, that their main industry is lumber. So there you go. I could become a diplomat, or I could work in a lumber mill.
Right. Right. So, and with that, I think we've answered all of the questions, I believe.
All right. Well, very good. Margaret, you have any last words?
I'd just like to thank both of y'all for this opportunity. It's been amazing, and I really appreciate that, as well as the service you do for our country. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Thank you. It was an honor to meet both of you.
Nice to meet you.